Yes, this afternoon. Welcome back, everyone. And thank you for joining us this afternoon for our Chips in Science 1 year later discussion. You probably know that Chips in Science was a game-changing piece of legislation signed into law just a year ago. And we have the opportunity this afternoon to have a conversation with Dr. Keith Yamamoto, Vice Chair, Chancellor for Science Policy and Strategy, and Director of Precision Medicine and Professor Emeritus of Cellular and Molecular Pharmacology at the University of California, San Francisco. And joining Keith is the Director of the National Science Foundation, Sethuraman Panchanathan. And we are expecting the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy Director, Dr. Arati Prabhakar. So with that, Keith, I'm going to turn the spotlight over to you.
Great. Thanks, Mike. If you had to pick out two people to try to talk on the topic under the header of Chips in Science 1 year later, Punch would be one of those, and Arati would be the other. So we're really lucky and pleased to really have these two here. I make that claim because those two hold the greatest responsibility for making that landmark piece of legislation actually happen. So before we start to tap their impressions and visions, and hopefully Arati will be able to stop in soon, let me do a bit of frame setting. The Biden administration made clear on day one their conviction that transformative advances in science and technology are essential for our economic and national security, and for addressing huge challenges in health, energy, and the environment. That conviction of the primacy of science and technology was visible in numerous acts and actions of the administration. The director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP, was elevated to the cabinet. The Inflation Reduction Act included huge science and technology and development investments for clean energy and for combating climate change. An executive order to advance biotechnology and biomanufacturing innovation, which would be coordinated jointly by the OSTP, the National Economic Council, and the National Security Council, called for developing and deploying engineering biology strategies across many disciplines to expand the economy, strengthen national security, and face up to those societal problems in health, energy, and environment that I mentioned. And the big achievement, which in many ways sets a path for other proposed federal science and technology policy focused actions, was the bipartisan passage of Chips in Science, the law signed into law, the measure signed into law by President Biden a year ago, on a sweltering day on the South Lawn of the White House, I might add, for those of us who were there. And although much of the science components of Chips in Science have been authorized but not yet appropriated, executive branch offices, agencies, and departments are putting pieces in place. So as I said, Arati's OSTP and Panch's NSF have major responsibilities, major opportunities for coordinating and implementing Chips in Science. And by the way, also many of the features of that executive order that I mentioned as well. So with that, Panch, we're a year in since the signing of Chips in Science. You were out there on that sweaty day. What can you tell us about the impact of the bill on the thinking, planning, activities in your agency? Could you stretch a little and give us your prediction of the bill's impact on U.S. leadership in science and technology, on our national security, and on our economic competitiveness?
Thank you, Keith. First of all, I want to say that thank you for hosting this session. You are a tremendous leader, and it's not just NSF. Leaders like you in the team is what is going to get this done. I want to be very upfront about that, and great entities like Research America. I want to be thankful first to Research America for all their efforts in terms of ensuring that they did everything in their power for the passage of this bill. I'm very grateful to President Biden, the Biden-Harris administration, and the bipartisan support in Congress. As you rightly outlined, last August 9th, the president signed this amazing Chips and Science Act, which has garnered attention all across the globe. Wherever I go across the globe, they keep pointing to this and asking and curious to know, what this is about and how America is positioning itself for what I would call supercharging the science enterprise, the technology enterprise, and as you said, the competitiveness. At NSF, NSF has been in the vanguard of advancing fundamental science discoveries, and there are many, many data points as evidence for that, including the fact that we have funded over 257 Nobel laureates, but who's counting? Also, in terms of making the investments, and I often say that it's triad tracks, if you may, pointing to the companies launching like Google or Qualcomm or things of that nature. You'll always find triad tracks to something that NSF has done in terms of early investments, as well as even investing in startup ventures and things of that nature. The triad tracks point to many innovation outcomes and startups and industries of today, and what will happen to industries of tomorrow. So if you look at Chips and Science Act, therefore, I would say that it is a moment for strengthening at speed and scale. It's not that we have not been doing certain things. We have been doing many things, but the global competition is putting us in a particular at this moment in a particular frame where I think we need to supercharge our activities. And you may ask, if you want to supercharge activities, do we have the elements to do that? And the answer is absolutely yes, because we're going to, I'm sure, talk about talent. If you look at talent alone, there is so much talent in our nation that needs to be unleashed, inspired, motivated, and brought to life. So which means that there is that potential that is already there in our nation that we have not fully realized. So in a sense, you can say the Chips and Science Act is making real the ability to be able to take the three things that NSF is really good at: talent at scale, ideas that get all the way from basic research discoveries to translational activities, and then to the final thing, that innovation, which all of them results in what impact NSF is able to generate all across the nation. So this is a time to make sure that we are doing that at full speed, full scale, all across the nation. Every part of our nation needs to be part of that. So Chips and Science essentially is enabling that in a big way. You made the point that it is an authorization, and we still need the appropriations to realize the full scale benefits of the authorization. The early investments that we've already made, if you want to call them as down payment, for the home, yes, the down payment, some down payment has been made, and we are investing heavily in terms of scaling the talent, ideas, innovation, therefore having the impact. And I can give you stories of that also. So there are specific technologies, Keith, that they have been pointing to that are important for our nation at this moment. AI, you would expect quantum, advanced wireless, advanced manufacturing, biotechnology, and a whole host of technologies that clearly we have the ability to be able to take all the fundamental discoveries that have already been invested in, ready to translate and ready to do amazing things, but also going back and further investing in the basic discoveries. This is a cyclical thing, or if you want to look at it as a symbiotic thing. That is not like you did this and now this is the outcome. You know this very well through your own research and all the things that you have done in your career, is that these are highly symbiotic. These fundamental discoveries make possible amazing innovations, and innovations make possible or inspire more fundamental discoveries. And that's what NSF is really good at. So we are fully, invested in terms of ensuring the success of the Chips and Science Act, but are also waiting for further investments as we are utilizing the investments already made to make sure that we're able to deliver on the full promise and the potential of Chips and Science. So you asked me a question, what do you see? At full scale, I can tell you that our country will no doubt, you talked about economic security, national security, solving societal challenges, making sure the full spectrum of talent is engaged. All of that would be possible and more. And therefore, the outcompeting any nation will be a natural outcome. It's not that is the focus. The focus is, can we unleash all of the innovative capacities, innovative potential, all of the talent? And if we do that, Keith, I have no doubts that our nation will be in the vanguard of competitiveness and making sure that we do that by ensuring prosperity, economic prosperity, societal prosperity, and national security all at the same time.
Great. Well, pretty optimistic message. But let me ask you a bit more about this, because when I listen to what you've said, what I hear, and maybe I just misheard this, so you correct me, is that Chips and Science is enabling for the NSF by basically by providing more resources to allow you to do more of what you've been doing all these years, maybe better and faster, but more of staying on, developing the track that you've built so successfully and importantly over the years, but really on that track. But I have to say that especially when I first heard about the Chips and Science Act, as it was originally stood up by Senator Schumer, it sounded like there was going to be a revolutionary change in the NSF, and what is very visible and everyone is aware of is that the act that finally was approved prescribes this new NSF directorate for science, innovation, and partnerships, TIP, and this looks like a new priority focus for NSF toward technology commercialization, regional innovation, workforce development, exciting stuff. But it seems like a departure from at least the way that I had always thought about NSF. I've had multiple NSF grants, sat on review panels and so forth. I had thought of it as kind of the central home for fundamental knowledge discovery, as supported by the federal government, and we can talk more about that. But at least it's my view, and I suspect it's yours, that it really has to be the federal government that does this fundamental knowledge discovery, and nobody's better at it than the NSF. And so when I first heard about the kind of, or at least the original incarnation of Chips and Science, it looked like, oh my goodness, they're gonna say, oh well, enough of that already. Let's move over to setting up companies and developing partnerships that will move that fundamental discovered knowledge into things, products, devices, medicines, and so forth. Is it a big change, or is it more of the same?
It's actually both, and let me explain this to you in the following way. I often talk about the NSF mission as the DNA of NSF. The one strand of the DNA that you nicely talked about, which is, discovery, curiosity-driven discoveries, and explorations. NSF is very well known for that, and you mentioned that, Keith, that we do this very, very well. And that's what I was talking about. And that mission I call strengthening that mission of what I call established mission of NSF. But what NSF does not get as much known for, or sometimes not get enough credit for, is the other strand of the DNA, which interweaves with this strand, which I called use-inspired, solutions-focused translations or innovations. And as I was saying at the end of my previous comment, discoveries and explorations make possible translations. Translations make possible more discoveries. So NSF was doing the other strand also, but it was not at the scale at which what we were doing the first one. So basically what we're trying to do is now bring together both of them at the level of intensity. And therefore the Technology Innovation Partnerships Directorate is an excellent expression of that. So essentially the role of TIP is to, as a strategic approach, to supercharge research outcomes and speed the cycle of discovery and innovation so that research can quickly translate into practical applications. And you do this through partnerships, of course, of every type, every kind, and so on. So one of the things, as you rightly said, the TIP Directorate codifies is this, Chips and Science does, is to codify the TIP Directorate, which then made possible unleashing a cascade of amazing programs and initiatives. We can talk about that later. I'm so glad that my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Arati Prabhakar has joined. So I want to give the floor to her. Hi, Arati, how are you? And so we'll get a chance to talk about these individual programs. But Keith, it is both. And so I just want to make sure that is, yes, transformational things, but holding on to the things that we do really well at the same time and scaling them too. So both at the same time, because these are not two different things. These are highly synergistic and symbiotic things.
Good, good. That's very helpful. Arati, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Keith. Hi, Punch. Nice to be with you all. Sorry for the delay here.
Not a problem. Not a problem. So we actually got started talking about chips and science, and I sort of let out by pointing out that chips and science is sort of within scope, or kind of leading within the scope of the Biden administration's attention that they are paying to the imperative and importance of science and technology for our national and economic security, for taking on these societal challenges in health and environment and energy and so forth. And so I wanted to just kind of put it in a frame of saying, yes, it's really important and it's really good that it really deserves the focus we're giving to it, but it's also kind of part of a whole that's really important. And I think that that's really significant. So the question that I led off asking Punch, I'll ask you as well, since you're now here, thankfully. And that is, what can you tell us 1 year in to since the signing of Chips and Science about the impact of the bill on your thinking, your planning, and your actual activities in the OSTP? And then as I asked Punch, can you stretch a little bit and give us your prediction of the bill's impact on U.S. leadership in science and technology, on our national security, on our economic competitiveness?
Great. Well, that's a boatload of questions. I want to just start by expressing my appreciation for Research America and this whole community for doing the work, but also then supporting Chips and Science and so many of the other measures that are underway, because it really does take this whole community. So it's a particular pleasure to be here with all of you. And again, very much to the point you made, Keith, I see Chips and Science as one piece of a much larger mosaic of actions that are all aimed at one thing, which is how does the U.S. have a science, technology, and innovation system that allows us to meet our great aspirations for the times that we're in. And, if you think about where we are as a country right now, and President Biden often talks about the fact that we're at a pivotal moment in history, a time in which the choices that we make right now will shape the decades ahead. And I think it really speaks to the fact that the aspirations we have for the future right now are as great as they have ever been in this country. Think about national security and how complex geopolitics are today, and yet we have to have global security and stability. Think about the fact that we have not yet realized the American dream of every single child being able to access the abundant opportunities in this wealthy country that we have. Think about the climate crisis. Think about the fact that we need to build economic competitiveness. The list goes on, and I think it really it speaks to the moment that we're in. Well, what does all of that have to do with science, technology, and innovation? That list feels impossible unless we have ways to knock down the barriers, open these doors, just open the horizons to solutions and new pathways to do these big things that we need to do. So that's the moment, that's the context that we're in. And achieving the innovation system that we need is not going to be one simple thing. Of course, it's what happens in the private sector and the market-driven part of innovation. And federal policies affect that. So we think a lot about that. And some of the other major investments that are happening, the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS part of Chips and Science. These are all, in a sense, these are the things that are taking the fruits of prior R&D and now implementing them and scaling them in ways that really change the lives of Americans across the country. So that's an important part of what innovation looks like. It's sending very important signals to our industry and shaping some of their R&D agenda. So I think we should just be clear that it's a lot more than direct federal R&D. And then within direct federal R&D, one of the major responsibilities that all of us here have, Ponch leading a specific agency, but from our vantage point at the White House, looking across federal R&D, this is our great challenge and the work that we come to work every day to do, which is how do we shape this so that really this powerful federal R&D system that we've had built in the last century, initially aimed at last century's challenges, how does it become really powerful for the big things we have to do in these times? Ponch has been talking about some of the important things that NSF is doing. Absolutely want to make sure that we strengthen and maintain the things that we know how to do really well on the basic research side, and add to that the ability to turn that into impact at the regional level in terms of commercialization, in terms of having the fruits of research inform policies and practices and norms and behaviors. So I think that's a very important piece at NSF. But, as we talk today, I'd like to make sure we also talk a little bit about some of the other parts of the R&D system, and including health, which I think is an important focus for a lot of the audience here. So I'll kick off with that.
Great. Well, let me actually pursue that point a little bit. One of the provisions of Chips and Science that I'm pretty sure falls to OSTP is coordination across agency boundaries, where it's been always my perception that those silo barriers are pretty sturdy, and so it's a big challenge, and really to integrate efforts across federal science and technology agencies in a way to have an integrated attack on some of these societal problems. Why is that coordination important? And knowing the history of not the best interaction and coordination and communication across agencies, how do you propose to be able to implement that in the OSTP?
Yeah, the coordination role is not at all new, as everyone knows. We've had the National Science and Technology Council for many, many decades.
That is the role.
That's the purpose of OSTP, and even the role from here in the White House of the Science and Technology Advisor forever. And I think, coordinate might be the most overused verb ever. And so I really want to get at the purpose of coordination, which is to the impact that we seek with these activities, these diverse activities across government. And again, I think a great strength of the American federal R&D system is that with some important notable exceptions, and NSF is actually one of them, the vast majority of federal R&D spending is done within the department or agency that has the public mission that it's trying to support. So, the Defense Department spends a lot on R&D for national security. NIH and the rest of HHS spend a lot of money on research for health, et cetera. And then NSF is one of our explicit recognitions that you also need a foundation of research across everything that we do. And so that has enormous benefits, again, if we're going to connect the output of research to impact. And at the same time, it means that there, for example, a few decades ago, when people started realizing we had to figure out what was going on with climate and climate change, it turns out so many different parts of government are working on different aspects of this one huge, very systemic scale problem. And that, I think a great example is the Global Change Research Program, the GCRP, which was established now many decades ago at a time where it was becoming apparent that something was happening with the climate. But when you said, well, exactly what and what do we do about it? We did not actually we had lots of strong opinions, partial answers. And GCRP was an effort that did bring together the different agencies. And when I talk to people who saw that process happen, they talk about the fact that each agency knew there was a big problem, started off saying, well, I'm going to solve it, and then quickly realized that they had part of the answer. And the real surge in capability came when they realized that they could build something that was bigger than the sum of the parts. And that's really what we strive to do with these activities in many of these major areas.
Great. So Panch, forgive me, I'm going to stick with Arati for one more question.
Yes, no, please do.
because she dropped this broad hint early on that she wanted to talk about the science and technology enterprise writ large that goes beyond what we see in chips and science. When I asked Panch about something related to that, the way I framed it was really asking whether whether this focus on having impact on these societal challenges represents some sort of a departure from the foundational federal support for curiosity-driven basic research. So I could ask that question, but let me let you turn you loose to be able to talk about the enterprise as a whole, maybe starting with that to say yes or no. There's a change in this, or is that imperative still there? And what we're seeing is the beginnings of an evolution of U.S. science and technology policy, not just represented by chips and science, but across the whole enterprise. And if so, what's driving that change, and what's it going to look like at the end of the day?
Yeah, let me start by saying the punchline, which is, of course, we're not going to stop doing curiosity-driven basic research. In the world, would we stop doing this very valuable thing that we are phenomenally good at? But of course, we should be evolving our capabilities. Like, the world changes, the problems that we need to deal with change, those scientific and technological opportunities change. We are in the business of creating those changes. So we of all people should recognize that our innovation system also needs to evolve and adapt, and ideally not just react to those changes, but be part of driving and get ahead of those changes. So if you ask the question from the driver for federal R&D, the reason everyone in this country just has a phenomenal, the support that people express for government's support of R&D is phenomenally strong. And the reason for that is that people understand that it is part of solving our greatest challenges and meeting our greatest aspirations. So then if you flip it around and you say, well, what would it take to achieve these great aspirations? Then I think that tells you a lot about how the innovation system needs to function to be really capable. And I want to use the health example because I think it's a really powerful one. Think about the fact that there's really just no area of basic research in biomedical research where we don't have a phenomenally strong position, a leadership position. We are the envy of the rest of the world for the research that we do in this area. If you ask what the societal objective is, the objective is better health outcomes for all Americans. Well, then you say, well, how are we doing on better health outcomes for all Americans? And the answer is completely unacceptable for the richest country in the world. And I would really encourage people to take a moment and look at what health outcomes look like in America. Look at how they look in aggregate in terms of just simple measures like expected lifespan. Look at how they look across different counties and states in the country. Look at the span, look at the disparities that exist. Look at the trends and then compare those to every other highly developed economy around the world. And it's actually quite appalling when you start looking at where health is in America. Well, so when I look at that, the shocking contrast between the best, most powerful basic biomedical research on the planet and then these health outcomes that don't make sense in a country of our wealth, that tells me there's something not working in the innovation system. And I think this then gets to, of course, we don't want to stop doing the good things that we are great at, but what are the things that we must add and change if we are to achieve the benefits from that basic research that's going on? And so, to come full circle to curiosity-driven research, let's be curious about what it takes What is the innovation? What is the research that would unlock the ability to change outcomes and not just to publish more great papers?
Great, fantastic. I'm being warned that we're short on time. I want to get back to Panch with a question about missing millions. So the next session is called Bolstering Our Research Workforce. In a previous session, Elias Serhouni and Dietmar Berger had a very interesting conversation about this important matter in the context of industry. So tell us a little bit about this missing millions conception of the National Science Board and the NSF, referring to the deficit of STEM trainees and professionals and the relative lack of diversity in the STEM workforce. How can we address that gap? What's the missing millions concept that's going to really take this on?
Thank you very much, Keith. I just want to say that, when Arati was talking about the interagency working, I mean, just this morning, if you were at the AI Institute's showcase, you would have seen 5 projects fully invested by USDA on the future of agriculture through AI. I mean, there are many, many examples. I won't go into that, but I just want to give you the confidence that we are working across agencies to make sure, and OSTP has been a tremendous, sort of facilitator of that. I mean, AI is an excellent example of the NARE, the National AI Research Task Force was led by OSTP, bringing all the agencies together to be able to develop the kinds of frameworks that is necessary for keeping us in the vanguard of innovation. So I want to say that first. On the missing millions, I mean, as I said in my prefacing remarks, if you go across the country, I came from a smaller state adjacent to yours, Arizona, and I see firsthand that if and when the talent is given an opportunity to exercise itself in its fullest form, it does it, with absolute outstanding outcomes that can be achieved through that. So having seen that firsthand, when I came to NSF, I wanted to make sure that NSF programs do ensure that we are providing the opportunities all the way from how do we ensure that the STEM inspiration at K-12 is at the highest level as it can be, but then the multiple ways in which talent can be further community college pathways or university pathways or upskilling, reskilling kind of pathways. How do we ensure that we are able to get the workforce of the future that is necessary for not only the industries of today? We are partnering with Micron and Intel and others in terms of co-investing with them with the semiconductor workforce that is needed as we are bringing onshoring some of the advanced manufacturing capabilities, but also how do we position ourselves for the workforce of the future? And whether it is in biotech, and bioeconomy focus area that is very important for us, as well as all of the individual, as I said, the technology focus areas that has been identified in the Chips and Science Act and more, to be able to get that workforce ready at all levels. And that requires us to be very intently focused on this missing millions concept. But more importantly, how do we unleash all of the missing millions that is out there, that is eager to engage, but do not find the pathways ready for them? And that's why I agree with Arati that President Biden, I thought Arati would say this, she says it very well. President Biden talks about possibilities, that the possibilities for everyone in our nation needs to be made real. I mean, it's not just to talk about them, but actually engage and make it real. And NSF is deeply committed to that. And NSF is committed to working with other agencies. As I said, OSTP has done a great job in putting the NARE work for as a framework, bringing agencies together. They do all of those things through NSTC and other things. So we are participants in those to make sure that we're bringing all of government to how we solve these problems of scaling innovation, taking this moment, as Arati said, and we are the role model for the world. If you go out to the United States and you talk to everybody, they look to us and what we are doing. They're keen to know how we are moving forward with chips and science. So it's very clear to us that we need to set the model, and that's what we're doing. That NSF is partnering with other agencies, with the industry, with economic development ecosystems, with everybody, bringing as it takes a village, as Arati said, to bring all of that together. So we're deeply committed to that.
Well, I'm sorry to say that we have to close, but let me just thank Arati and Panch, each of you, for your leadership in the implementation of chips and science, and more broadly for your leadership in shaping and evolving the federal science and technology environment and building active partnerships outside of government that will really move these things forward in transformational ways. We really admire what you're doing and really appreciate your coming today to spend some time talking with all of the interested attendees of this forum so that we can be informed and actually go out and advocate for not just passage of Chips in Science, but for supporting all of the endeavors that you have underway. So thanks for your attendance. We appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Keith. Thanks for all that you do. Appreciate that. Thanks, Mike. Bye,
Mike,
Arati.
back to you.
Take care.
Well, thank you. What a great discussion. And I know we could use more time, but time has moved on, and we'll be joining another session, as Keith nicely teed up. We'll be joined at 4:25 back in the lobby for our session this afternoon on bolstering the R&D workforce. So thank you very much for the conversation, for joining us, and we'll see you in a few minutes.